discussion on the topic Palestine-Israel dispute, realities and solution. The issue of Palestine and Israel Palestine during of peaceful existence, and soon after Ottoman Empire, we see that there is immigration of Zionists in the state of Palestine, and then the conflict that is ongoing started, and then we had many incidents or landmarks which could be called the British mandate for the Palestine. Then Holocaust occurred. Then UN comes up with a treaty, and how colonialism played a role. And then we see the Arab-Israel war, and later on another Arab-Israel war happened. Then we see the Camp David Accord, which was signed, and how the settlers, influenced the conflict which currently exists. And then we see a major reply or an uprising, which is famously known as Intifada, from the side of Palestinians, and how Hamas was created. All of these have, in one or the other way, contributed to the current conflict which exists between Palestine and Israel. So generally, when Palestinians are referred, major depiction on the media and social media is to say that they are Muslims. But Palestine, the state of Palestine during Ottoman Empire included Muslims, Christians, and Jews. So before we take a stand, how we support, on what basis we support the Palestinian cause, we from Jamaat Islami Hind Karnataka, Students Islamic Organization of India, Karnataka State, GIO Karnataka, and Solidarity Youth Movement, and other NGOs which support the cause of Palestine, decided that we have a discussion on this topic, so that we all get to know what actually the Palestinian issue or conflict is, so that we have a strong backing while we support the Palestinian cause. So today with us, we have speakers from all over India who are going to sort of brief to us conflict. So introduce our main speaker for today, Zafrul Islam Khan Sahab, who is the ex-chairman of Delhi Minorities Commission, an author, a journalist based in New Delhi. He is currently editor and publisher of the Milli Gazette Fortnightly, which focuses on issues concerning the Muslim community. He is also the founder and chairman of Charity Alliance, an organization involved in relief and welfare work in India. Also with us today, we have Advocate N.D. Pancholi, who is a senior standing counsel in Delhi High Court and Supreme Court. He is currently the Vice President of People's Union Civil Liabilities, PUCL, and he is a human rights activist. Also with us today, we have Dr. P.J. Vincent, who is head of postgraduate department of history at Government Arts and Science College, Calicut, Kerala. He is currently working on deputation as press secretary to Honorable Speaker of Kerala State Legislature Assembly. He has also written a book on the Arab-Palestinian conflict, which is a very widely read book about the Palestinian cause. Also today we have Fawaz Shaheen, National Secretary, Director, Center for Educational Research and Training, who hails from Gaya, Bihar, and currently he has completed his BA LLB from Aligarh Muslim University and pursuing his MPhil in Law and Governance at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Also to note, we have the State President of Jamaat Islami Hind, Dr. Saad Belgami Sahab with us. who shall also be addressing the audience today. So to begin with, I would like to call upon our main speaker for today, Dr. Zafrul Islam Khan Saab, ex-chairman, Delhi Minorities Commission and editor, Milli Gazette. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would try in this brief introduction, brief because to cover the whole gamut of the Palestinian issue, we need at least 3-4 hours to understand what is the basis of this conflict and how we have got here. But in the time allotted, which is half an hour, I will try to put you in focus about what is the basis of this conflict and how we have got here. Jews claim that Palestine is their property, that God gave it to them, but there is no such proof because Torah or the Hebrew Bible had been lost and was written and rewritten and rewritten many times. So we don't know actually what was the words of God. And then in our own holy book, Quran, there is no such indication that God gives any such land property to any people. He gives it to good people, pious people, God-fearing people, but not to people who kill and turn others into refugees. So just to give you a brief, very brief idea about how Jews uh, got into Palestine. They were being persecuted in Egypt, as you know, during the time of the Pharaoh. Then Prophet Moses came and said that we are going to take you to another land where you will not be persecuted. But he could not do it, and the Jews stayed in Sinai for 40 years, just wandering here and there. And then finally, under the leadership of Prophet Yusua in 1220 before Christian and BCE, they were able to go into Palestine, and they left they continued their struggle to get hold of Palestine or part of Palestine for the next about 100 years and could not do it. Then finally, during the time of Prophet David, they were able to get hold of parts of Palestine. And later, under his son, Prophet Suleiman, also they ruled. And this was barely a small period of about 40 years, during which they really ruled that area or part of that area. After Kings David and King Solomon, the Jewish kingdom got divided into two kingdoms, Yehuda and Israel, one in the north and one in the south. And this also, these two kingdoms kept fighting each other for the next 200 years, and then they disappeared. This is their history. Yani barely they ruled that area for 40 years, and after that kept fighting for 200 years. So even if 200 years is added, these are 240 years, which is nothing compared to all these years. I think it's at least 3,000 or more than 3,000 years in the history of that land, during which the real inhabitants of those parts, which are Canaanites or Jebusites, they stuck to the land, and they were there all the time. And these people, the Jews, were turned out of Palestine by Nebuchadnezzar in 721 BCE, who enslaved part of them and then erased this kingdom. And later they were allowed by the Persian king to come back but even then, once again, uh, uh, the Romans in 70 Christian era or common era, they were once again driven away from there, and the whole their temple and the whole Jerusalem was destroyed, totally dismantled by the Romans. So this is their history. They have no real history in the land over there. And from 70 CE, 70 Christian era or common era, they had no presence over there. This is 2000 years. After 70, first presence starts in 1918 when the British took over Palestine. So this is roughly 19 centuries, 1900 years. After the gap of 1900 years, you don't come to a land or to a house or to a property and say that this is mine. This is the history, because the British, and then not only the British, the many European countries did not want Jews in their countries. They wanted to throw them away somewhere. This is how they supported the idea of giving Palestine to the Jews and establishing over there something which they call Homeland of the Jews. Although Palestinians were already there, Palestinians were living there since earliest times in history. They were living over there, but still, British might and British army opened the gates of Palestine for them. This is how, by the year 1948, when Britain had become very weak due to the Second World War, Jews decided that the time has come for them to establish their, their, their state. During this time, from 1918, from 1918 to 1948, Jews had established their own secret army there. Not really secret, but the British had allowed it, which was called Haganah. It was a full-fledged army, like any army. It had tanks, it has aircraft, it has all kinds of weapons that any modern army has. And in addition to that, they had also many terrorist organizations like Irgun, like Stern, like Itzel, which were also working with Haganah for this purpose, while the Arabs were illiterate people. They were peasants. They did not know the intricacies of modern life. So they took them by surprise in 1948 and started expelling them from there. Expelled them. I mean, right now you have about 7.5 million Palestinians around the world living as refugees in refugee camps inside Palestine, in Gaza, and in West Bank, and also in other countries like Jordan, like Syria, like Egypt, and Lebanon. So they expelled them, and people who were not willing to go away, they massacred people over there so that others would flee, like Deir Yassin. It is very famous. It was a town. It was a small town, rather a village in central Palestine. They came in the darkness of night and killed about 300 or over 300 people and threw their bodies in a well. So the others started fleeing. So by the time that 1948 and 1949 armistice was in place, most of the Palestinians had fled from there. Uh, and Israel became a reality in 15 May 1948. And after that, Israel kept expanding because they were quite prepared for that. They took more land. They took new areas like Rashrash, which is now called Eilat. After armistice, they took it because at that time they had all the support of world powers, especially America, and even Russians were supporting them. So they were quite prepared to take on ragtag Arab armies or the Palestinians who were not prepared. This is how, and by the time 1967 came, even what was left of Palestine, Jews or rather Israelis took that, even occupied even that. So by 1967, June 1967, Israel was able to occupy the whole of Palestine. In 1948-49, they had occupied 78%, and in 67, they occupied the rest 22%. So now that is the situation, that they occupy all of Palestine. Uh, and this went on. Palestinians tried various ways. They also had their liberation organization, Palestine Liberation Organization, and some other outfits, organizations which work for liberation of Palestine, but they could not. The story is very long. I will not go into that. But somehow, in 1992, they, with the pressure of other countries, America and Western countries, European countries, Norway especially, they concluded a peace treaty with Israel, which is called Oslo Agreements. This was signed in 1992, and 1993 it was put into effect, and Palestinian Authority came into being in what is now part of West Bank, and their capital or their main center is Ramallah. It was written in the agreements that in 5 years, a sovereign state, Palestinian state, will take shape and will appear. Now, 28 years have passed and nothing has happened. Even what the Palestinian Authority at that time enjoyed has been taken away. Now it is just a municipality. It has no powers, whether it has president or prime minister, but they have no power. They are like mayors, and Israeli tanks can roll up to the presidential palace anytime they want, in day or night. So they have no power. At this time, Gaza people were able to drive away the Israelis. This was in 2000, year 2000. They were able to, even in Gaza, they were building settlements. They have built a lot of settlements in West Bank, but in Gaza also they had built some very big settlements like Yamit. But in 2000, the Gaza people, through their resistance, were able to drive them away. This is how the Gaza problem started, because once they drove away the Israelis started laid siege over them. Now Gaza is actually, since 2000, and particularly since 2006, it is a big open prison. It is closed from everywhere. Israelis have keys to the gates, to the north and to the west. Egyptians also, because they work in tandem with Israel and also with America, because America is giving them a lot of aid, so they cannot go against America. So the Gaza, since then, this is at least now 16 years, Gaza is a big prison. People cannot go out. People cannot go out even for medical treatment, for education, for jobs, for anything. It is a big real prison. A majority of people, something like 67% are jobless. So this is what is, but still they are adamant to fight the Israelis. Israelis are occupiers, whether they are not inside Gaza, but they are outside from everywhere. They elected Hamas, as Hamas is a political movement, and also it is an armed resistance movement. They elected them in 2006, and Hamas was able to form a government of Palestine, but it was not allowed to work. America, British government, French, many other, Israel, of course, they forced Hamas to resign, and the people, the Fatah people, who had actually got only something like 23-26% of votes, they are since then ruling Palestine, or whatever is Palestinian Authority, without any real justification or real powers, because they do not have the trust of the Palestinian people. Right, this a few months back, there was a talk about holding very elections in Palestine, which are due since long, at least since 10 or 15 years they are due, but they are not being held. But Israel, because Israel and Western countries, especially America, they fear that Hamas will be voted against by the Palestinian people. They said that you cannot hold them. So this is also, I mean, this denial of the democratic right to Palestinians is one of the reasons why all this flared. And the most recent reason is, of course, Sheikh Jarrah, which is a locality inside occupied East Jerusalem, where the Israelis want to take over the land and expel the Palestinians, people who are living there since time immemorial. And they are saying that this is a court order. This court order actually is based on a 1970 order which was passed by Israel's parliament, Knesset, which says that if Israelis or Jews owned any property in occupied Palestine, they can reclaim it. If this law is of course very flawed. I mean, this law is illegal, because this law gives Jews some rights which denies the same rights to the Palestinians. The Palestinians, if Palestinians have 1,000 houses in what is now Israel, Israelis or Jews have only 1 or 2 houses in what is occupied Palestine. So you give Jews some rights which are not given to Palestinians. Palestinians also have the natural right to reclaim their properties, their orchards, their lands, which were taken over by Israel in 1948. But this law, which is so-called law, but this is actually illegal law, is being used to drive away the Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah locality in Jerusalem. At the same time, also Israelis tried to take over or go into the Aqsa Mosque complex by force. They are doing it for the last so many years. They are doing it. They want to somehow have a foothold inside the Aqsa complex, which is controlled by Muslims. It is a mosque, actually, a number of mosques inside. It is an elevated ground, actually, where so they go up there, and with the police and with army, which protect them, so that they pray over there, but Muslims fight them and expel them from the compound of Aqsa. This time also they did it, and when Muslims resisted, they fired at the people who were praying at that time at the end of Ramadan, and killed so many people, injured so many people. This led the people in Gaza to fire a few rockets in anger, that this is not good. You should not do it. Israel used this to start its attack on Gaza, which has no basis actually, because Israel is an occupying power. It cannot wage a war against people who are occupied. And in international law, you can wage a war, a just war against another country. But this is not another country. This is an occupied country, and Israel is occupying. Israel is like a thief, like a murderer who has come inside my house, and it says that they have got self-defense right. You don't have. A thief and a murderer does not have self-defense right under Article 51 of United Nations Charter. So what Israelis are saying, what their supporters are saying, what their own laptop media is saying is wrong. It is illegal. And if Palestinians go, and I hope they will go to the international court, will indict the Israelis for this war, which they have unleashed. It is still going on. I think it may end within day two, as there are indications that Americans are putting pressure now, because there is a lot of condemnation all over the world against this, and people are holding America, which is a fact. Israelis are fighting with American money. They are fighting with American weaponry. They are fighting with American Iron Dome. Everything is there is American. Americans are giving them aid, $400,000 million every $4,000 million every year is gifted, is a tribute which Americans pay to Israel. So Israel actually is fighting for America, fighting for America's control over the Middle East. This is what actually Israel is doing, so that America can control the Middle East through Israel. So now Americans are feeling the pressure, and as we see in the news from yesterday, that Americans are telling them enough is enough. Now stop it. So I think maybe within a day or two it will be stopped. But the out of proportion damage that Israel has done, I hope that some state, of course, will go to the international court and get justice done for the Palestinians, and proper punishment is given to the Israelis. So this is how we have reached here, and actual issue is the liberation of Palestine, which was taken by the Jews who came there as refugees, who came there as immigrants, and then took over this land, and they turned out and expelled the real people of the land who had been living there for thousands of years. Now these real people, real inhabitants of the land are now refugees. They should be allowed to go back, and there is no other way unless the refugees go back, unless Palestine gets its capital, which is the East Jerusalem, which Israelis say we won't give, unless the illegal settlements are wound up and broken. I think there will be no peace, and this will go on and on. The problem is not Gaza. The problem is Israeli occupation. That is the problem. And I think that if we here in India, or Indian government or Indian people, want to put any pressure, it should be on Israel, not on Palestinians. Which we cannot equate the victim and the tormentor and I mean, there is no way to equate between a killer and a victim. This is the situation in Palestine, and this is what Israel is doing. So unless the Palestinians get their dues and their land, at least what they want, Palestinians now want only the land which was occupied in 1967. Give it to them. It is just 22% of historical Palestine. They are not asking what was theirs in 1948 and 49. They are saying just give us 22%, and Israelis are not ready even to give them this 22%. They are not ready to put even Oslo Accord, which they themselves signed, into practice, and to make it into a fact. This is the real reason that the Israelis, especially this government of Likud, is not ready for that. Earlier government of Labor was ready for this, but since these people came, and I would suggest our friends who are listening to this, there is a document called Clean Break. Clean Break. If you just Google, you will find this document. This document was prepared by Likud, which is ruling now, with the help of American newcons, to frustrate Oslo Accords. And when they came to power in 1997, they put it into effect. And this is what you see now, that Palestinian Authority has been almost dismantled. It exists now only in name. There is no power, no nothing. And Oslo Accords have not been implemented properly. Until that is done, there will be no peace in Palestine, and there will be no peace in Gaza. And I salute people in Gaza, for they are trying what is their due under international law. International law gives occupied people every right to liberate their people, their land, and this is what they are doing. So Gaza people are on the right. They are doing the just thing, and Israel is on the wrong, because it is an occupied power which is pummeling and beating unproportionately its victim for the last 70 years. Thank you very much.
जुल्म फिर जुल्म है, बढ़ता है तो मिट जाता है, खून फिर खून है, टपकेगा तो जम जाएगा. Jazakallah, Dr. Zafrul Islam Khan Sahab, for a very crisp and brief description of what the Palestinian conflict in actual is. Dr. Muhammad Balawi, who is a Palestinian academic and writer based in Istanbul. He's founder and president of Asia Middle East Forum, who holds a PhD in English Literary Studies from International Islamic University, Malaysia. I would like to call upon you, sir, to please address the audience.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear sisters and brothers from India, I'm very delighted to be with you this evening. And my thanks goes to the organizers in JIH Islami and SIO. I listened carefully to Dr. Zafar Islam Khan, who just summarized the whole Palestinian cause in few minutes. I also say salam to him and each and every one of you. I think it wouldn't be a very easy job to talk after Dr. Zafar Islam Khan, but I will try my best. As we said today, discussing the Palestinian issue, Israeli warplanes, cannons, Navy is bombarding Gaza. They have already bombarded medical centers, schools, universities, the infrastructure, water, drinking water pipes, sewage pipes. They've also bombarded a building that accommodates international press and media agencies. They are working systematically on cutting off Gaza Strip from the rest of the world. For the last 16 years now, Gaza is under a strict embargo from sea, land, and air. And as you fully know, that the people of Gaza are under intense pressure. There is a lot of unemployment. There is also the pandemic of the COVID-19. Israel did not allow vaccine to freely enter Gaza Strip. So now, as Israel brags about her ability to give the vaccine to most of the people, the Palestinians are left without vaccines. And so many people actually are dying. Yet due to this tragedy, which is now we are witnessing, people almost forgot completely about the coronavirus and COVID-19. So they huddle in small houses, even if they try to cover themselves and their children in the basements of their buildings. They are not safe because, as we have seen, 14-story buildings are turned into rubble, and even people who are sitting under the ground, the Israelis systematically bombard streets, you name it, whatever is moving on the ground. So they are trying to inflict the maximum damage on the Gaza Strip because they know they can't carry on for long. There is a lot of international pressure, especially from Muslim and Arab countries on the United States. So Biden and administration, which is more inclined to prepare for the upcoming fight with China, it doesn't care much about the Middle East and it wants to cool things down. But unfortunately, as you have already seen, the Netanyahu government is almost about to collapse. And in the last 2 years, there were 4 general elections in Israel, and all of them failed. And Netanyahu most probably will go to court of law. And if he is tried, most probably he'll spend much of what's remaining of his time in prison. So he's very keen on utilizing the current situation in his favor. This all actually started with occupation. It will end when occupation ends. This is a basic fact. So whatever we are witnessing today, it hasn't started yesterday. It hasn't started with the Palestinian reaction against the Israelis' assaults against Masjid al-Aqsa and Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. It started in 1948. And even before that, I remember that your grandfathers were supporting our grandfathers. So it's as old as that. It's almost a century. So if you go into your literature, most probably you'll find your grandfather most probably has participated in an activity for Palestine in the 30s or the 20s or the 40s, even before the independence of India, and it is still going on. Israelis controlled most of Palestine in the 40s, and after that especially Al-Quds or Beit al-Maqdis. And by the way, I would like to draw your attention that many people now in Urdu newspapers and literature are using the Jewish terminology describing Al-Quds and Beit al-Muqaddas, calling it Jerusalem. So whoever is using that, please stop. Don't use the Israeli terminology. Use the Islamic terminology, which is Al-Quds or Beit al-Maqdis. Don't you ever use Jerusalem. So, in the Israelis, they occupied, contrary to international law, the western part of Beit al-Maqdis in 1948, and in 1967 they occupied the eastern part of Beit al-Maqdis, Al-Quds. So both of them are occupied. So many people, they are under the misconception that only East Jerusalem is an occupied place, but West Jerusalem is an Israeli part, which is not right. Both of them are occupied in international law, according to international law. From the first moment, the Israelis tried to change the identity of the city. Mind you, that Al-Awqaf, Waqf, of course, you are very acquainted with this term in Urdu and in India, because most probably India is one of the biggest countries in the whole world that has Awqaf, isn't it? So mind you, the Awqaf in Al-Quds, about, I think, 48% are Muslims and 52% are Christian. Although Christians nowadays are not more than 1% of the Palestinian people. Many of them migrated to the West. But to show you that Al-Quds under Islam preserved the identity of the city, preserved the Christian right, although they were very small minority. The Israelis, what they are doing nowadays are systematically changing the identity of the city. They are forcing Palestinians out of the city in a very attempt to racially cleanse the city and make it Jewish only. They've started in West Jerusalem, and now they are trying to do the same in the old city, especially Masjid al-Aqsa and its neighborhood. It's not only, by the way, in Sheikh Jarrah, in Sulwan, they are doing the same. In Hayy al-Bustan, they are doing the same. In Al-Khan al-Ahmar, they are doing the same. What actually agitated the people of Al-Quds, the Muslims in Al-Quds, that there has been systematic work from the government and from settlers groups to change the identity of Masjid al-Aqsa itself and make it a disputed place. They have followed three strategies. First strategy is to divide it according to time. Let's say that Masjid al-Aqsa, as Dr. Zafar al-Islam has already mentioned, is an Islamic site. It is a big mosque like Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. And inside there are smaller mosques. There is a courtyard and the Dome of the Rock and Masjid al-Qibli. So inside that compound, there are about 5 or 6 mosques. And what they tried to do is that they systematically stormed the mosque, especially during daytime, let's say between Fajr namaz and Dhuhr namaz, where Muslims are few in numbers, and they try to practice their prayers in Masjid al-Aqsa. So in that way, Masjid al-Aqsa becomes partly Jewish as it is Islamic. And the other way, the other strategy they used, in that big compound, they tried to take a place, let's say next to the wall, and make it for a small synagogue for them. This has also happened in what is now in English known as Wailing Wall, which is not Wailing Wall, it's an Islamic wall. It's part of Masjid al-Aqsa. And in Arabic, we call it Ha'it al-Buraq or Al-Buraq Wall. Buraq, you already know because it's, I think, well known in all Islamic cultures. And so basically, the third strategy which they used to storm Masjid al-Aqsa in big numbers, like thousands of people at a time, and to declare it as a Jewish, they call it spiritual place. So in that way, Muslims find themselves in minority, and they finally will accept the new situation. In general, changing the status quo in Masjid al-Aqsa, Muslims were very vigilant, and they stayed in i'tikaf. Maybe tens of thousands of people stayed in i'tikaf when the Israeli authorities and police found that their strategy is not working. They stormed the Masjid al-Aqsa and started brutalizing the people. Then the rest of the people in Jerusalem joined these clashes, and you have seen the rest of the story where Muslim governments, Arab countries, they declined to interfere. It's only after Gaza started firing rockets and Israel became heavily under fire, the United States and other Arab states, Muslim states, tried to intervene. And you could imagine that up to this date, the OIC did not actually intervene, did not have a session on Masjid al-Aqsa. So the Gaza people, they are left, and the Jerusalem people, they are left to their destiny. As I told some news agency earlier, the world actually interferes just when they feel that Israel is under pressure. Israel, they rush to the rescue of Israel, not to the rescue of the Palestinians. Unfortunately, in the media, many people tend to equate Palestinian legitimate resistance with terrorism, which is also a crime not against Palestinians only, but against humanity in general. because they deny the idea of freedom, which is the basic character of a human being. In my opinion, we should always begin by a basic fact that the problem started with occupation, not with resistance. Once the occupation ends, then everything will end. If the whole world is unable to deliver justice to the Palestinians, then we should not blame Palestinians whatever they do to get their rights back. And whoever tries to equate the victim with the victimizer, he actually suffers from moral bankruptcy. We as intellectuals, we always have to be on the right of the victim, on the side of the victim, not the victimizer. We should not even discuss the Israeli propaganda. They always try, as other colonizers, they always try to blame the victim. Blaming the victim is something very negative. It should not be taken seriously. The Israeli narrative is a biased narrative and a Palestinian narrative, which should be here presented to people and dealt in a very serious way. Basically, there are a lot of ideas which I can actually present today, but I think there are a lot of speakers who are willing and eager to participate as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you all safe, and inshallah we'll see India at the side of Palestine as it did for the last century. Long live Palestine, long live India. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
दिल ना उम्मीद नहीं नाकाम ही तो है, लंबी है गम की शाम मगर शाम ही तो है. Thank you, Dr. Makram Balawi Sahab, for putting forth the ground situation and what's happening currently in Palestine, Gaza, Hamas. We all here not only express our solidarity with the Palestinians and Palestinian cause, but also pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that these settlers are moved out of their place and Palestinians get what is their due right and get back their homes, get back their places so that they can peacefully exist in their homeland. Moving ahead, now I would like to call upon ND Pancholi Saab, who is an advocate and vice president of PUCL, with the words of Malcolm X. The Zionist argument to justify Israel's present occupation of Arab Palestine has no intelligent or legal basis in history, not even in their own religion. Over to you, ND Pancholi Saab.
Thank you very much. I am thankful to Jamaat-e-Islami, Student Islamic Organization SIO, and other organizations, GIO and SYM, for organizing this meeting. That is very important meeting. It is very important issue, and very important issue of human rights and dignity of persons and rights of a community, rights of a nationality, which we must talk and discuss the way they are being persecuted. Jafar Islam Sahab and Mr. Balwai, Mukarram Balwai, they have given a detailed view what is happening, and it is really terrible. The most reprehensible part of this Palestinian situation is that in spite of the undisputable fact, this is undisputable, that Israel has forcibly occupied large part of Palestine, Jerusalem, and in spite of that, it is undisputed fact, they are still going on expanding their settlements, their repression on Palestinians. And a surprising part is that UNO, which is a body to maintain peace and to see that human rights are protected, rights of the people are protected, they are not able to do anything. More than 70 years have passed, this problem is subsisting. What is this happening? Then, and this one Mr. Avraham Berg, former Speaker of Israeli Parliament and former Chairman of World Unionist Organization, his, as I come to know from papers, that he is reported to have said that outgrowth of this crisis is years of blockades and restrictions in Gaza, decades of occupation in the West Bank, and decades of discrimination against the Arabs within the state of Israel. So that is the situation when the right-thinking people within Israel, they are also raising their voice. And they deliberately, Mr. Jafarul Islam has stated and Mr. Balwai has stated many facts, but the way the provocation they are doing in order to insult the dignity of the Palestinians. You see the recent crisis. Now, on the first day of the Ramzan, uh, they raided the mosque. They wanted this not to say azan, to use loudspeakers during because the president of the Israel wanted to speak nearby. They deliberately brought out the situation, and when the leaders of the mosque, Aqsa Mosque, then they thought that it is very, in fact, insulting move to them. Then they did not agree. But then they raided the mosque, and just after that they also raised barricades on the outer skirt of the city just to prevent the people from assembling there. So these are deliberate the acts of provocation. And as Mr. Jafarul Islam said, that law is totally violation of the right of equality. They want what we see in India, in other parts of the world, the law is that if persons are settled for many years, in India it is 12 years, and on any land or on government land for 30 years, and nobody can displace them. That is the universal law in the democratic countries. Now they want those people to be displaced who are residing for decades, and because bringing a law that before 1948, if they can reclaim their land, so that is a nonsense. I mean, this is in violation of all settled principles of humanitarian law, or this legal, in the legal community we know it, how disgusting this law is. So what, and this what is happening, so many things are happening which we know, but the most disgusting thing is the role of the UNO. What UNO is doing? UNO is a body which has been established in 1948 to save, the declaration was that, to save the succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in the fundamental rights, in the dignity and worth of human person. That was their declaration. And to unite our strength the strength of the all members of the UNO to maintain peace and security in the international sphere. So what we are saying that of the world, all the people of the democratic countries, they must raise their voice. We must uh, uh, pressurize the international community. Must pressurize to UNO to see to it that the rights of the Palestinian people are protected, their lands are given to them back, they are not displaced. So all these demands must be raised. And as member of a civil liberty organization, People's Union for Civil Liberties, we have always been in support of the cause of the Palestinians, and not only People's Union for Civil Liberties, but on behalf of all the human rights organizations, civil rights organization in India. I can say, I can claim to say, they are all with the cause of Palestinian people, and we must see that we have to raise voice, and we will raise voice, and we see that all this kind of repression is somehow is stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Inti Pancholi Sahab, for expressing your solidarity with the Palestinians and Palestinian cause. The way Israel has been playing the victim card could be described in the words of Iqbal. अपने किरदार पे डाल के पर्दा इकबाल, हर शख्स कह रहा है जमाना खराब है. Moving ahead, I would like to call upon Brother Fawaz Shaheen, National Secretary, SIO of India, and Director, SIRD, to please address the audience.
Thank you.
I would like to invite upon you एक अर्ज तमन्ना है सो हम करते रहें. Brother Fawaz Shaheen.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for organizing this, and I feel very humbled to be speaking after all of these illustrious speakers. I don't know what I can add to their analysis, and of course, I must begin by paying our respects to the martyrs of Gaza and all the other occupied Palestinian territories, and by paying salutations to all our brothers and sisters in the occupied territories who have, for their resilience and for the struggle that they're carrying out against probably the most advanced, technologically advanced military power in the world. And this is a struggle that they're waging with no significant financial support, with improvised technologies, with very little international backing, with no standing armies. And really, this kind of a struggle against such an entrenched oppressor, it is only possible by the strength of your soul. And this is really a struggle that is waged from the strength of your soul, not from technological advancement or not from military technologies. And we must salute that, and we must really, the whole world, every liberation movement, every human rights movement in the world needs to learn from the resilience of the Palestinians. And we salute them for presenting that example before us. Now, we've already heard a lot about what is happening in Palestine today is not new. It is not happening for the first time. This is the fourth significant attack on Gaza in the last dozen years, since 2008 at least. What is happening in Sheikh Jarrah, the eviction of a historic Arab neighborhood, that is nothing new. In fact, eviction of Palestinian neighborhood, forced evictions of Palestinians from land that is rightfully theirs, that is the core of the Zionist project. The core of Zionist strategy, ideology has always been dispossessing Palestinians of their rightful land and settling them with new owners, with uh, colonizers. That colonial settlement policy has always been the cornerstone of the state of Israel, and in the last few years, they have only been doing it with more and more impunity. And similarly, the desecration of Al-Aqsa Mosque is something that we have seen in repeated cycles, where the Israeli state does it to provoke, to divert attention, uh, uh, to demonize, get a reaction, so that they may demonize the Palestinian cause in the eyes of the world. So all of those things we've heard from our speakers, how these keep happening in cycles. But with that being true, we must also acknowledge that this kind of extreme violence uh, never comes without uh, without forcing through some changes. And I think what we are seeing in play out in Palestine right now, there are three, I believe there are three important takeaways that we need to understand, and that we need to watch how they play out in the coming days. The first is the immediate one, which is uh, a Palestinian brother talked about the fate of Netanyahu, and how he has lost 4 elections and somehow still clung to power. And this latest round of violence is very much Netanyahu's cynical power grab, cynical attempt to somehow hold on to the prime ministership so that he's not sent to jail. And we don't know what will happen to him, but it seems that for now, he has stalled, he has gained another chance to remain in power for a few more months. There might be another election in Israel, but regardless of what happens to Netanyahu, in the last few years, he has successfully pushed Israeli politics towards the most extreme articulations of Zionism. For many decades now, we have seen Israeli politicians like to behave as if they are leaders of a European liberal democracy. They like to speak like leaders of England or France or the United States. And when the reality is that they are not, and they have never been a liberal democracy, and the Israelis are unquestionably, they are an apartheid state, a racial state, a racist apartheid state. But that is a reality that they have tried to shelter, that they've tried to always hide, and they project, they love saying we are the only democracy in the Middle East and all of those really nonsensical propaganda. But Netanyahu's desperate politics has actually exposed that side of Israeli politics for the whole world. And now Israel has the language of Israeli politics has Netanyahu has empowered those elements of Israeli society so much that no longer can Israel even claim for propaganda purposes that it is a democracy or it is like any other European liberal democracy. And that discourse, that propaganda of the Israeli state is now gone forever. With that also, of course, he has what we are seeing in Israel today, what we are seeing Israelis do today in Palestine, the attack on Palestinian homes, villages, mob violence of the kind that maybe Palestinians have not seen for a number of years. Mob violence within the occupied territories. What we call communal right in India. But of course, in Palestine, what is happening is not communal right. It is one-sided mob violence and ethnic cleansing. So that kind of mob violence and organized mob violence. That is also something, even though it's not new, it is certainly as a pattern, as a phenomena that is happening with regularity. It is a little bit new, and it means that Netanyahu's politics have unlocked a very nasty side of the Israeli society. And we do not know where that is going to lead, where that will take, what turn it will force this issue to take. But it is indisputable that Netanyahu has empowered and unlocked the nastiest, most racist, and the most shameless elements of Zionist ideology. and they are going to be running Israeli politics from now. They are going to be the driving force of Israeli politics from now on. The second important takeaway, I think, is that the Oslo peace process is is finally dead. The two-state solution or the peace process, which really a lot of the Palestinian movement had never accepted, because they always knew that this two-state process, the Oslo peace accords, it will ultimately only be an excuse for Israel to strengthen their position, and it will give legitimacy to the state of Israel without giving anything to the Palestinians. That has always been the apprehension of many of the Palestinian people. And over the last 30 years now, that really has come to fruition. Israel has used the Oslo Accords to gain legitimacy, and at the same time, it has gone on an unprecedented settlement building spree, where really Israel's policies have made a two-state solution virtually impossible. Now, for diplomatic courtesy, for the sake of diplomatic rhetoric, many countries may keep saying that peace, ceasefire, peace on the basis of two sovereign states with East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine, pre-1967 borders, all that diplomatic rhetoric may still stay for the next few years. But the reality on the ground is that Israeli society is no longer capable of accepting a peace accord as two-state solution, and Israeli policies have made a two-state solution impossible. And so now where we go from here is really, it will require a new kind of political imagination, a new kind of political leadership to chart a way forward, because the old and everything that specifically the Islamic movement or the many within the Palestinian movement feared about the Oslo peace process, all of that has come true. It has not given anything to the Palestinians except a Palestinian Authority that has become Israel's enforcement agency in the occupied territories, virtually, and a situation where formation of a sovereign Palestinian state has become virtually impossible within the confines of the Oslo Agreement. So I think it's safe to say that the way this current round of violence has happened, the kind of reactions that have been engendered in Israeli society, and the situation of the Palestinian political leadership is such that the Oslo peace accords are dead, and now a new kind of political language, a political resolution will have to be thought of. And that brings us to the third most important takeaway. We are seeing right now, I think, unprecedented political unity among Palestinians. It is probably for the first time in the history of the Palestinian struggle that, in the last few years at least, that people in Gaza, in West Bank, and in the occupied villages and cities within Israel have come out together with one voice under one banner. The general strike day before yesterday was historic. The Palestinian movement has never seen anything like this. And also, if you see when Sheikh Jarrah was, even that is a threat even now, but when Israeli soldiers landed on Sheikh Jarrah and started forcing its owners out, threatening forced evacuations, the protests started in West Bank, protests started near Al-Aqsa, and protests started in Gaza. And people in Ramallah, in West Bank, were shouting Yalla Gaza. Our Palestinian friend told us that Israeli rocket firing from Hamas towards Israel was necessary to strengthen the protests in Sheikh Jarrah. That kind of political understanding, political solidarity is, I think, something that was missing from the Palestinian cause for a very long time. And what we are seeing today, the Palestinian street is reclaiming its political agency. I don't think that the current Palestinian Authority, the leadership that occupies the Palestinian Authority, legitimately speaks for the vast majority of Palestinians. For a very long time now, the Palestinian Authority has not been a representative body. And what has happened this time is that Palestinians have demonstrated that very capably. And through their actions, through their suffering, they have actually reclaimed their political process. We do not know what will happen from here on out. This is a very complicated struggle. This is a very complicated issue. At one level, it's very simple. It's an issue of occupation. It's an issue of a people being deprived of their homeland, but also, years of war, years of negotiations have added layers of complexities. And we are at a moment where Palestinians are coming forward and they are expressing a desire for a new political course, maybe a new political leadership, we do not know, and a fresh line of struggle. Where this leads us in the coming days, no one can say. But after a very long time, I think we are, although we are very saddened to see the death and the destruction, but after a very long time, there is also some hope coming from the Palestinian streets. And we salute our Palestinian brothers and sisters for that. And we have no hesitation in urging full solidarity with the people who are out on the streets today and who are charting a new course for their political destiny. In the meantime, of course, before concluding, the last word that I would like to add is, for all of us, it is high time that we also move a step forward from statements of solidarity. Of course, statements of solidarity are important. And one very important aspect is educating people about the Israel-Palestine issue, about the dispossession and the conquest, the colonial Israeli state and the dispossession of Palestinian people. It is very important to talk about this issue in the correct language and to educate people about it, which is why these programs are conducted. But we also need to move a step ahead, a step forward from statements of solidarity, and we need to start talking about putting pressure on the Israeli state through economic sanctions, through targeted sanctions against Israeli leaders and officials. And we need to start talking about proceedings in the International Criminal Court against specific Israeli violators and specific Israeli war criminals. I think that discourse we need to start now. It is no longer enough to say, to call for peace, to call for ceasefire, to call for de-escalation. We need to start talking about sanctions. We need to start talking about punishing the state of Israel economically. And we need to start talking about prosecuting the war criminals within the Israeli state apparatus. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I hope I've been able to contribute something to the discussion.
Thank you, Brother Fawaz Shaheen. बेदार हो दिल जिसकी फुकान साहरी से, इस कौम में मुद्दत से वो दरवेश है नायाब. On to the next speaker, President Jamaat al-Islami, present the
जवाब साहब शुरू कर सकते हैं. आवाज नहीं आ रही है.
जी
अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह रब्बिल आलमीन वस्सलातु वस्सलामु अला रसूलिहिल करीम व अला आलिहि व अस्हाबिहि अजमईन. क़ाल अल्लाहु तआला फ़िल क़ुरानिल मजीद अऊज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम वातसिमू बिहब्लिल्लाहि जमीअन व ला तफ़र्रक़ू. इंसान को है फिर मारिकाए रूह व बदन पेश, तहजीब ने फिर अपने दरिंदों को उभारा. अल्लाह को है पामर्दी मोमिन पे भरोसा, इब्लीस को है यूरोप की मशीनों का सहारा. अम्माबाद, जनाब ज़फ़रुल इस्लाम खान साहब, एमडी पंचोली साहब, representative from Palestine, Dr. Balawi, Fawad Shaheen, the organizers of this very important symposium. Alhamdulillah, we have been listening to eminent personalities expressing their views on the Israel-Palestine conflict and trying to show to us what the underlying causes are and how realistically we can move forward to a solution of this long festering problem. Indeed, it is a very sad day for all of us internationally, for all human beings, for all countries, for all people, to see the naked aggression of one of the most powerful armies in the world against the hapless and helpless citizens who have been impoverished and discriminated against and persecuted for a long time now. The naked aggression of how they are bombarding civilians, women, children, old people, hospitals and schools and roads leading to hospitals, and how they are blockading the aid that is being intended to reach to this desperate people. Indeed, it is a sad day that in this world of so much talk about human rights and United Nations and governance and treaties and constitutions and courts and justice, we see this is happening right in front of our eyes. We have seen the sentiments of support expressed for Palestinians, not just in the Arab lands, not just in the Muslim countries, but all world over, even in the Western countries. People have come out strongly against this bombardment and against this aggression from Israel on the helpless and people who have no sources to defend themselves against this aggression. The immediate context of the present conflagration has been discussed about here, and how the JIH authorities tried to defile the Holy Al-Quds Mosque during the month of Ramadan, and how they instigated and how they fired upon the innocent worshippers, and how they tried to evict the people from Sheikh Jarrah. The fact that the Palestinians, instead of being docile and pliant and submitting to this aggression and occupation, they stood up and spoke against it and stood up and resisted this occupation is what angered Israel and forced it into this naked aggression. However, as our speakers have very eruditely explained to us, this conflict goes back at least 100 years. 1948, yes, the illegitimate child called Israel was born. The state of Israel was declared by the Israelites, and subsequently the Western powers began to recognize it. But the process started in 1987 itself, when Theodore Herzl, along with his friends, formed the Zionist movement, and gradually and systematically from there on to the Balfour Declaration in 1917, and then to the actual creation of this Palestine, first the clamor for a homeland for Jews, and then the Jewish state being declared in 1948. It's a long process of atrocities and occupation and massacres and terrorizing and evicting people from their homelands and from their lands, from where they have been displaced and made refugees in their own lands and made refugees in other countries. So this is a long process. What was about 1%, 2% Jewish population under the Ottoman Empire, the natural citizens of Palestine, Jews, who have every right to stay there, they are only 1 or 2%. But you see that a systematic campaign from the West and the migration of Jews from world over happens here, and under the Zionist supervision and their patronage and the support of Western countries, you see the population rising up to 33% in 1948. And then today, we must realize that 75% of the population in Palestine is Jewish, and 85% of the land today is being owned by them. You can Google and see the map of Palestine at any moment, and you would realize that what was the Palestinian territory in 1917, for example, gradually has reduced about 15% of land for the Palestinians today. You would see even the West Bank that has been earmarked for Palestinians is a moth-eaten appearance with all the occupation, with all the territories that Israel continues to occupy and develop for their own citizens. So the fact that we need to realize is this is a long story of Zionist aggression, of depopulizing and ethnically cleansing, and of disempowering and impoverishing the natural citizens of Palestine. Also, what needs to be realized is the design, is the nefarious design that the extremist element, the Zionist element amongst the Jews have. It is not that they would want to stop here. They have their eyes set on demolishing the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They want to build the Temple of Solomon in that place. And they want to pursue their agenda of Greater Israel, which is to expand the present boundaries of Israel to include the Nile Delta of Egypt, most of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, parts of Turkey, and a large portion of Saudi Arabia, Hijaz, including Medina itself. This is the design they have, and this is the aggressive expansionist agenda that they want to pursue. And this is not something which is a hidden agenda. Rather, this is something which is depicted in the wall, on the walls of their parliament, Knesset, which talks about Greater Israel. Hence, there is a need to look at the problem in its historical context, in its real context, and realize that this is only a new chapter in a long saga of occupation and terrorization of the native people of Palestine. Briefly, I would like to talk about a couple of things here. Number one, the immediate response and our responsibilities in the given scenario. And then I would like to spend a few minutes on the long-term measures, the real and important measures that we need to take if we really want to address this issue. The immediate response, our responsibilities. Number one, we need to condemn Israel in one voice. The whole humanity needs to, just as it is being exhibited on the streets of all the major capitals, the whole international community needs to come together in condemning the crimes against humanity. The way they have bombarded ordinary civilians, women and children. It is a crime, and it is a crime worth punishing in the International Court of Justice. We need to bring them to book. We need to ensure that there is immediate cessation of hostilities. Number two, we need to support the Palestinians in one voice. It is our duty as Muslims. We are one ummah, and the Prophet ﷺ has described us as the Muslims being one body, and any part of the body getting injured, the whole body would feel the pain of it and would express its sympathy by way of fever and tears. So it is our bounden duty to stand up and raise our voice and support the Palestinians in this hour of crisis today. Also, when there is an evil happening out there, when there is an injustice happening out there, we are duty bound to raise our voice. We are not able to help them physically, but at least we can raise our voice. We can build public opinion, and we can say what the truth is, and that is a responsibility that we have to do. Unfortunately, you see, today, the Muslim world is not showing the kind of response. The Muslim leadership, mainly the Arab lands, the kings and the sheikhs and the sultans, they are not showing the response that is expected of them. Hamas's founder, Sheikh Yassin, had rightly said that when he was a child, he saw that Gaza was under occupation and they were victimized and they were under subjugation. But then he says that as he grew in later years, he realized that the people of Gaza and Palestine are they are heroic and they are working for the freedom, and they have all the strength of faith, and they are struggling for their rights, and they're waging a heroic struggle for the rights, and it is the Arab countries around Israel, in the Arab lands, which are really the slaves of the Western desire today. So there is a need to support Palestinians, and we need to voice our concern in the international forums, all the international forums, UNO, Organization of Islamic Countries, the human rights organizations, the UNHRC, the International Court of Justice. They all need to be mobilized, and they need to be put into action to try and bring pressure to bear on Israel, and to we need to even, the international community needs to think about whether there is a need. In fact, there is a need for an international peacekeeping force which can monitor, which can ensure, and which can look after peace between these two nations there. As some of our speakers mentioned, there is also a need to think about the economic boycott. This is what hurts them most, and this is what they understand really. And it's up to the Muslims, and Muslims who constitute about 25% of the population, 54 Muslim countries. If they really are serious about the cause of Palestine, they should express it in economic terms too, and boycotting the goods that the Western countries produce. It is these very goods that we consume. It is this very McDonald's and KFC and Coke and Pepsi that we buy and consume for our children. It is the money that is coming out from this. We must remember that it is the same McDonald's company which produces F-16s, which have been used for bombarding the ordinary Palestinians today. We also need to make this a humanitarian cause. And there is a need to stand up against this injustice. There is enough injustice being committed around the world. Palestine is the foremost and the topmost example. But the tyrants, the powerful, and the despotic rulers all around the world are committing crimes against the innocent civilians in their own countries. There is a need for all peace-loving people, for all people who stand up for humanity and who like to see peaceful coexistence of nations and peoples. We should stand up for justice, we should stand up for humanity, and we should force that the UN resolutions, umpteen number of them, which are so brazenly ignored by Israel, that they should be implemented. We need to, we make a special mention of the brave stand that the Indian government, the UN representative from India, Mr. Tirumurthy, has taken in condemning the atrocities of Israel in support of the Palestinian people. That needs to be appreciated, but more needs to be done. We have to go that extra mile. There is many more things that we need to do. We have been standing up with Palestinians, but for some reason, we seem to be cozying up to Israel more now than supporting the victims of this long drawn conflict. There is a need to bring pressure on Israel. We need to use our diplomatic channels to show what the truth really is, and stand by the long cherished values that our foreign policy has long been championing. Also, we need to make special prayers for the people of Palestine. It is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the disposer of affairs. He is the real sovereign here. And if he wishes, things can change overnight. We need to beseech, we need to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to stand in support and do prayers for the sake of Palestinians. We have seen what one direction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do, what a small microorganism which cannot be even seen, coronavirus, the type of havoc that it can create, and how humanity and mankind, notwithstanding all the progress and technology and civilizational progress, we see where we stand today in front of this pandemic. So let us pray for the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and let us pray for the hapless people of Palestine. I would like to briefly mention a few more things as long-term measures that we need to take. Yes, immediate context, we have to do these things. But really, as was also being brought out by our speakers here, we need to really spread awareness about the reality of the issue. There are a lot of false narratives being spread, and propaganda that the media, especially the Israel and Western media would like people to believe. Really, the history needs to be looked at in detail. We have to learn from the history of Israel. This festering sore called as Israel, this illegitimate child, needs to be shown its place. And we have to restore Palestine to the original inhabitants of that land. We need to show who the real aggressor is, what the real problem is, who is the aggressor and who is the aggrieved. And it is, as rightly said, it is ending the occupation and not the resistance where the future lies. हम आह भी करते हैं तो हो जाते हैं बदनाम, वो क़त्ल भी करते हैं तो चर्चा नहीं होता. This is the situation that we see around us, and it is high time in this world of social media that the reality being told to the people. We also need to warn people, especially the Muslims, about the nefarious expansionist design of the Zionist lobby in Israel and what they intend to do to Holy Quds and what they intend to do with the plan of Greater Israel needs to be understood, and we need to stand up firmly against this. We also need to understand that this issue is not just concerning the Palestinian nation. This is not a national conflict of Palestine. This is not even an Arab-Israeli issue. This is, on one hand, for Muslims, this is an issue of faiths. This is about Al-Quds. This is about the Holy Lands, about whose barakah and importance. There is so much in Quran and Hadith that is said. This is the first Qibla to which the Prophet and his companions turned to for 14.5 years. This is the third holiest shrine for Muslims. This is the place the Prophet led all the prophets in prayer before he ascended on the trip of Miraj. So this is a holy place for us. This is a matter of faith for us. This is a matter which concerns the entire Muslim Ummah, and the whole Muslim Ummah needs to mobilize for this. Secondly, it is also an issue that is a question mark on the conscience of the entire human race. Are we going to be sitting silent as spectators when Israel is committing this horrible and barbaric crime? Is there not enough strength amongst the right-thinking people to stand up together for the cause of justice here? We need to mobilize the opinion, mold public opinion, and show this issue as to what really it is. There is a need to bring about unity amongst the Muslim Ummah. It is very unfortunate that we are so divided today, and it is with a lot of difficulty the OIC has convened and issued a statement, like as it usually does. United we stand, divided we fall. फिरकाबंदी है कहीं और कहीं जाते हैं, क्या ज़माने में पनपने की यही बातें हैं? Is this the way you can encounter this problem? And what a pity, and what an affront it is, and what a shame for the Muslim rulers and countries around. وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها ونجعلهما وليا ونجعل لكم وليا ونجعل لكم نصيرا. It is, Quran says, and why don't you fight for the sake of people, for the sake of the downtrodden, for the sake of the oppressed, the weak in their own lands who have been trampled upon, whose rulers are oppressors, and they are crying out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to provide them a helper, to provide them support. And Quran is questioning, and this is a question that should be asked of all the standing armies of Arab countries. When there are wailing women and children who have no way of protecting themselves or safeguarding themselves or defending themselves, and when they are bombarded in daylight, does it not prick their conscience? Do they not feel ashamed that they are not in a position to do anything? It's not the people in those lands. It is the unfortunate rulers that we have who need to understand what their true responsibilities are. It is a ratio of 1:100, the Jews in Israel and the Muslims in the Arab lands. The ratio is 1:100. And if you take the ratio of Jews and Muslims all over the world, Muslims are 175 crores and Jews are about 1.5 crores all over the world. Again, a ratio of not more than 1:100. And what a pity, what a ignominy, what a disgrace that this dagger of Israel is plunged into our chest, and here we are with a bleeding wound and unable to do anything concrete about it. We need to bring pressure on the Western countries. Muslims and Muslim lands account for 54 countries, but 25% of the population. We have the best of material and human resource. We have the best of armies, best of weaponries, and the financial resources which can buy the world over several times. If we use our influence properly, our diplomatic channels, our economic avenues, our political mileage, and our military power, and if we stop purchasing the weapons from them, if we deny the military bases that we have so openly given to the West, we can understand that the course will change. We have to make sure that USA feels the pinch, and they have to be made to realize that the cost of supporting Israel is so huge that they would desist from doing and turn the course of action. Also, Muslims need to understand to be independent, to be self-reliant, to be self-sufficient. It is a pity that Muslim lands, in spite of their financial resources, educationally, economically, and industrially, they're so backward. Even today, in our own Muslim countries, we see the food that the food that they eat, the clothes that they wear, the goods that they use, everything comes from West, everything comes from outside. It is such a pity that our countries are in such a shape. We need to be more self-reliant, and only then we can assert our opinion. I also think it is our duty to do justice to the position that Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. We are the Khairi Ummah. We are the Qawwamina bil Qist, people who are given the responsibility of establishing justice. We are the Ummat al-Wasat. We have been given the wherewithal to lead the world in the right direction. But we are not doing justice to our Quranic position or to our responsibilities. Rather, really speaking, what we see today in the world, the disgrace that we are being submitted to, is a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our indiscretions, for our sins, and for our irresponsible behavior. We need to follow and implement Sharia. We need to be the true custodians of Quran. We need to be the representatives of Islam. We need to live up to the position of Da'i Allah. We need to witness to the truth that has been given to us in the form of Quran and Sunnah. Only then we deserve the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the nusrah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly, if we do justice to Quran and our position, the situation is certainly bound to change. We need not be too much taken aback and lose hope and despair in the current situation. Inshallah, the future is going to be with us. The prophecies of Quran and Sunnah are with us. What the Prophet has said about the times to come, we are all aware of it. And we are at the brink of the fifth phase, when again the haqq would prevail and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Quran would become the guiding light for the entire humanity. Friends, Allama Iqbal has said while addressing the Palestinians, he asked them to see the reality. It is not that we can expect too much from the Arab lands. It is not that we can expect too much from the Western countries. Teri dawa na Geneva mein hai na London mein, farang ki ragejaan panje Yahud mein hai. The West is so much under the domination and control of the Zionists that it is foolishness to expect that they would turn around and stand up for the cause of justice overnight. It is not. Allama Iqbal is talking about the time when League of Nations existed, and that's why he's mentioning Geneva. Teri dawa na Geneva mein hai na London mein. Reality is the whole Western countries are under the dominance and control of the Zionists. They have to really come out of this situation on their own steam. गुलामी में नाकाम आती हैं शमशीरें न तदबीरें, जो हो ज़ौक़े यकीन पैदा तो कट जाती है ज़ंजीरें. And addressing the Palestinians, Allama Iqbal again said, सुना है मैंने गुलामी से उम्मतों की निजात, खुदी की परवरिश और लज्जत नमूद में है. Have belief in yourself, self-confidence, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and do justice to your position and build your own position, and inshallah the world will listen to you. This temporary phase of Jewish domination, as if it were, that we are seeing today, which is not really a domination, is a passing phase. Quran has decreed, Zuribat alayhim zillatu wal maskana. Zuribat alayhim zillatu aynama sukifu illa bihablim min Allah wa hablim min al-nas. There may be brief moments when, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with the help of people, they might gain some respect and some position here. But we are seeing here a nation, Maghzubi alayhim, on whom is the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for long 2000 years, who have been in diaspora and who have been left here as an example of disgrace and what happens to a community which doesn't follow what is expected of it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to learn example, take example from the Jewish tribe. We have to, being the Qari Ummah and being the Ummat Wasat today, Muslims have to rise up to their responsibilities. We have to take the world along. We have to take all the peace-loving people along with us and usher in a new era, usher in a new age where peace and tranquility will really prevail. I would conclude by pointing to one more couplet from Allama Iqbal, referring to the deficiency or the wrong footing of the United Nations organization. Yes, there is a yearning for peace and coexistence, but the West would like to bring together different nations with their national prejudices, racial and linguistic and power equations and geographic prejudices. Never UNO has been able to establish peace. There is a need to bring together humanity on the basis of being a common brotherhood. Tafriq milal hikmat afrang ka maqsad. Islam ka maqsad faqat millat Adam. To divide people, to divide nations, and to continue an internecine and everlasting struggle amongst nations is the objective and the policy of the West. But Islam would like to see the entire humanity. Islam ka maqsad faqat millat Adam. Makke ne diya kha ke Geneva ko ye paigam, jamiyat aqwam ke jamiyat Adam. What Makkah has to offer, what Islam has to offer. There's a talk of Geneva here because that was League of Nations at that time, and we need to look at UNO and New York today. Makke ne diya kha ke Geneva ko ye paigam, jamiyat aqwam ke jamiyat Adam. This committee of nations, ever fighting nations, the Security Council which has never stood up for the cause of justice of weaker nations. There is a need to bring humanity on the footing of common brotherhood, of dignity of man and equality of man, and not a conflicting conglomeration of nations. This is just one example of how Islam can provide a lead for international peace. Thank you very much for giving a patient listening. I have mentioned to you about the current situation, and we have learned about the realities in the background, what we need to do in the present circumstances, and how we need to address this situation in the long run. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen the people of Palestine. We pray for their brave efforts, and we pray that the victims are helped and succor is given to them, and the aggressors and the terrorists, the real terrorists, are brought to book and justice. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Jazakallahu khair, Dr. Muhammad Saad Belgami Sahab, President JIH Karnataka.
Video on the
not just a roadmap for the Ummah. So I believe with this we come to the end of this today's program. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this opportunity to connect with each other on this virtual platform and try understanding what the Palestinian conflict is, and to express our solidarity through this online platform. And I also thank all our speakers for today who on being invited have joined us and have addressed our audience. And lastly, but not the least, the most important, I thank all the participants who, by joining us on this platform, have expressed their solidarity with the Palestinians. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this Palestinian conflict comes to an end very soon, and Palestinians and all the people around the world live in peace, get what is their due right, and I hope that peace prevails around the world. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.